Greetings. R. Frederick Riddle here with another episode of Christian News and Views. This is episode 26, 101. And this is Monday. And the title here is Five Ways Ukraine Wins. The article itself goes a little bit further. It says 5 ways Ukraine could win the war against Putin's Russia. So I'm going to give a summary and a key here. And here's the points. Ukraine will never get the 1945 image of total victory, and it cannot retake Crimea and the Donbas by force. But Russia invaded to erase Ukraine entirely, and against that aim, a free, armed, prosperous nation is a Russian defeat. Here are 5 ways Ukraine wins the war that actually matters. A defended line, a real security guarantees, a military powerhouse, the sovereign right to join Europe, and reconstruction into lasting prosperity. So we're going to look now at the 5 ways Ukraine can win this war without retaking every inch of ground. Up to this point, that's what everybody has been focused on. Either it's almost like feast or famine. This is saying that for them to win, they want to have all their land, but you have to be realistic too. And so the if they were to stop right where they are right now, this is what I think this is assuming, then this would be there's 5 different ways they can win. So let's look at them. The image of total victory that defined 1945 is not coming to Ukraine. There will be no surrender sign on a battleship, no triumphant march into the lost territories, no moment where Russian forces are driven from every acre of Crimea and the Donbas. Ukraine does not have the manpower or the offensive combat power to physically reconquer the roughly 1/5 of the country that Russia occupies, and any honest assessment of the war as it stands today has to begin by accepting that reality. But victory in a war like this, one has never required reconquering every square mile of soil. Russia did not invade in February 2022 to capture a strip of the Donbas. Putin invaded to erase Ukraine as an independent state, to install a puppet government in Kiev, and to pull the country permanently out of the Western world. Measured against that actual war aim, a free, armed, prosperous, Western integrated Ukraine that Russia failed to conquer is not a defeat. It is the precise opposite of everything Moscow set out to achieve. Here are 5 ways Ukraine reaches that outcome. 1. A defended line backed by iron, not paper. The first requirement is the simplest to state and the hardest to build. Ukraine needs a fortified line of contact so heavily defended that any future Russian offensive would cost more than the Kremlin could possibly gain. This is the South Korean model, and it is the most realistic of the externally brokered outcomes analysts have mapped for the years ahead. South Korea never accepted the legitimacy of the North and never signed away its claim to the territory above the 38th parallel. What it built instead was a defended armistice line so formidable that a second invasion became unthinkable. And behind that line, it grew into one of the most prosperous and powerful nations on earth. Ukraine can do the same. The fighting stops roughly where the front sits now. Ukraine does not formally cede its occupied territory in international law. It simply accepts that it does not control that ground for the moment while it builds a defensive belt of fortifications, minefields, layered air defenses, and drone surveillance that effectively makes the existing line permanent in practice. The drone war has actually made this easier than it would have been in any previous era. The same first-person view drones, loitering munitions, and persistent surveillance that now account for the overwhelming majority of battlefield casualties, work just as well on defense as on offense. Ukraine that cannot mass forces to retake Crimea can absolutely build a defensive line that no Russian mechanized formation could breach without catastrophic losses. The line does not need to be where Ukrainians want it. It needs to be one that holds. Pretty simple. And I know I'm mixing a little bit of bias in here, but I think you know where when I'm doing that. Number two, excuse me. Number two, security guarantees that do not require NATO membership. Ukraine's path into NATO is blocked for the foreseeable future. Several alliance members will not extend an Article 5 commitment to a country in an active territorial dispute with a nuclear armed neighbor, and the current American administration has shown no appetite for it. So the security guarantee that makes a Ukrainian victory durable has to come from somewhere other than formal alliance membership. The framework that has been discussed across the diplomatic efforts of the past year points toward what negotiators have described as Article 5-like guarantees provided by the United States, NATO, and Europe without the formal NATO accession that Moscow treats as a casus belli. In practice, this means binding bilateral and multilateral commitments to arm Ukraine, to maintain Western forces or trainers on Ukrainian soil away from the front, to guarantee continued intelligence sharing, and to make clear that any renewed Russian aggression triggers an automatic and severe Western response. The distinction matters enormously. Ukraine does not need the NATO flag over Kiev to be secure. It needs a credible certainty that Russia cannot attack again without facing the same coalition that has armed Ukraine through this war. A guarantee that is real but informal is worth more than a treaty article that members are unwilling to honor. The test of any ceasefire is whether the guarantees attached to it are credible enough to deter Moscow, because the Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service has warned that for Russia, any potential settlement must harm the interests of Ukraine and the countries supporting it. A ceasefire without real deterrence is just a setup for the next war. Point number three. A Ukrainian military powerhouse built to last, a defended line, and a security guarantee that are only as good as the army standing behind them. And here, Ukraine holds an advantage that did not exist before the war. The Ukrainian military that exists today is the most combat experienced and battle-hardened force in Europe, and it has spent 4 years learning how to fight and defeat a numerically superior great power. The path to durable victory runs through turning that wartime force into a permanent one. Ukraine has become a world leader in drone warfare, fielding domestically produced systems by the hundreds of thousands and innovating faster than any Western defense bureaucracy could. It has neutralized the Russian Black Sea Fleet using naval drones built in workshops in a country without a navy, thereby defeating one of the world's major fleets. The agreement announced in late May to provide Ukraine up to 36 Gripen fighters with a framework reaching toward 150 aircraft points toward a modern Ukrainian Air Force operating from dispersed bases that Russian missiles cannot reliably destroy. The goal is a Ukraine that is too strong to invade, a military powerhouse with a domestic defense industry producing its own drones, missiles, and armored vehicles, supplemented by a steady pipeline of Western aircraft and air defense, integrated with European command and intelligence networks. It becomes a country that Russia cannot threaten, regardless of what flag flies over the alliance. Strength is its own security guarantee. And Ukraine is closer to that kind of strength than it has been ever been. Excuse me. Number 4, sovereignty to choose its own associations. The heart of what Putin invaded to prevent was Ukraine's right to choose its own future. And the heart of Ukrainian victory is securing exactly that right. This does not require NATO. It requires the unambiguous principle that Ukraine, as a sovereign state, decides for itself which economic, political, and security associations it joins. The most important of these is the European Union. EU accession is the single most consequential association available to Ukraine, and it does not carry the same red line status for Moscow as NATO membership does. Membership in the European Union would anchor Ukraine in the Western economic and political order permanently, and Ukrainian leaders have pushed for accelerated EU accession decisions even amid the heaviest Russian bombardment of the war. A Ukraine inside the EU is a Ukraine that Russia has permanently failed to pull back into its sphere, which is the whole reason Putin went to war. The principle extends beyond any single institution. A victorious Ukraine is one that can sign defense agreements with whichever nations it chooses, host whichever trainers and advisors it wants, buy weapons from whichever suppliers it prefers, and align itself politically with the democratic West, all without asking Moscow's permission. The free exercise of that sovereign choice is not a consolation prize for for failing to retake Crimea. It is the actual thing the war was fought over, and securing it is the actual victory. Number 5, reconstruction that makes Ukraine worth defending. The final pathway for this is the one that turns survival into something that looks unmistakably like winning. A Ukraine that ends the war as a broken, depopulated, impoverished rump state has not really won, regardless of where the line sits. A Ukraine that ends the war and then rebuilds into a prosperous, modern European nation has won decisively, because prosperity behind a defended line is what transforms a frozen conflict into a national triumph. The model again is South Korea, which emerged from its war as one of the poorest countries on the planet and built itself into a global economic power behind its armistice line. Ukraine has assets South Korea does not. It has some of the most fertile agricultural land in the world, a highly educated population, a technology sector that has continued to operate throughout the war, and the prospect of enormous reconstruction funding. The frozen Russian sovereign assets held in Western institutions, totaling in the range of $300 billion, could serve as a reconstruction fund to rebuild Ukrainian cities, infrastructure, and industry. A rebuilt Ukraine that is wealthier, freer, and more closely tied to Europe than it was before the invasion is a living proof that Russia's war was not merely unsuccessful, but counterproductive. Europe's response to the conflict will shape its defense industrial policy and security architecture for the next decade, and making Ukrainian reconstruction a success is squarely in Brussels' strategic interests, both to stabilize its eastern frontier and to prove that a country can choose the West and thrive. None of these 5 pathways requires a Ukrainian flag over Sevastopol. Each of them requires something harder and more durable than a battlefield reconquest. They require Ukraine to hold the line, secure real guarantees, build an army too dangerous to attack, exercise a sovereign right to join the West, and rebuild into a nation worth all the sacrifice. Now, I don't really have an opinion other than what I have mentioned, and one additional fact here is in reading that article, um, it made the statement that Putin's entire purpose was to take Ukraine. I kind of disagree with that. I think that Ukraine was a part of a puzzle that he wants to reclaim all the countries that once belonged to the Soviet Union. Uh, but that's a minor point because if all those five things take place, then he's defeated on that as well. The other countries will also be able to uh, proceed along. Ukraine was a key part of chess. If you want to use chess, um, you can of a puzzle, missing that key piece that you build everything else on. So I may disagree on some minor points, but this is very, very interesting to me. So I'm going to say, lay it out there for you. You decide what you think is right. Now, you may know more about um, into the details that's out there than I do, and you may have a different perspective, a different angle of looking at things than I do. But I think that this makes sense. It makes sense historically. It makes sense militarily. And believe it or not, it makes sense, I think, biblically. And why do I say that? Well, I've told you all along that there is a war coming in the future, and it will involve Russia. I don't believe it's going to involve Russia invading Ukraine. I think it's going to involve Russia looking down at Israel, and they're going to come. And they will have allies like Iran, who is not in a position right now to mount any kind of national or international attack. And Turkey, which has its own problems. China, which right now has problems because of the war going on with Iran. They have supplies problems, energy problems, and their own. It's causing problems at home, domestic, as well as industrial. So that war is coming. It may come in my lifetime. I'm 83. And so that doesn't leave a whole lot of time left. But Russia needs time. Russia needs time to rebuild. You know, they can bluster all they want and they can deny all they want. But in this day and age, they're not doing they can't. It's almost impossible to keep their situation secret. They can hide a base here or there and stuff like that. But overall, the impact, the effect is out there for the world to see. It's the same thing with Iran. I read an article recently saying that they could, I think it was attacking Trump and saying that he was lying about the condition of Iran. It's easy to check, folks. There are different sources out there. I use some. There's different sources out there who paint a pretty bleak picture for Iran. Yeah, they still have the elements of a government. Yes, they have their guard, which is basically their military, because their army has been so weakened as to be almost non-existent. It still exists, yeah, but it's so weak uh, it's a non-factor. Um, the biggest weapon they have is drone attacks and mines, and that's being met. And I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in the future it becomes well met, maybe even smothered. Uh, I don't have any secret knowledge on that. It's just my observation based on what I see going on over there. Iran is being strangled economically and energy wise and things, any other way you want to look at it. They have lost some key leaders. And every once in a while, you hear of another leader being killed. And so the situation just right now is, I think that they're going to be forced one way or another to at least get a ceasefire. Putin needs a ceasefire. Um, I think the Ayatollahs need a ceasefire too, for that matter. But we're talking about Ukraine right now. So I think Putin needs, and he needs to be able to say something about a victory. Now he's shown an ability to turn falsehood into what it looks like the truth to his people because they want to believe it. They want to believe that they're winning, and there's enough evidence that he could claim it. I mean, after all, he's got 1/5 of the country of Ukraine under his control now, and so he can claim, and he can change his claims because the Russian people are, for the most part, uninformed of what's going on, and so he can address that. His biggest problem will be those leaders in Russia that want him to have a total victory. Well, he's shown an ability to remove those kind of obstacles. We won't get into that today, but he needs a ceasefire of some sort and one that he can claim victory from. These 5 points, he may understand what they really mean, but at the same time, he can use that, turn it about, and because he's got to secure his position, excuse me, he's got to secure his position so that he doesn't get unseated. In Russia, if I don't know if it's like it was, but in the past, you lost your job, you sometimes lost your life. The only one I know that ever was removed from power in Russia that wasn't executed was Khrushchev. There may have been others, but that's the only one I know about. So it's a dangerous thing to do, is to lose in Russia. And so my opinion is this has to be something that Russia needs to have it, needs this a ceasefire along these lines. And so we can have some peace, but they need the peace to rebuild their military and to reestablish his strength within the government, but also the military, so we can, in the future, maybe be a world threat again. Not that we want him to be, but that's what Putin will not give up his dream. He's got that. That's part of his. That's part of his DNA, you might say, and so he wants to see something. If a ceasefire is not the same thing as a treaty, so he's not bound by any conditions other than right along the front line there. So he'll be able to rebuild his military, rebuild his economy, but mostly rebuild his political strength right now, and then the others will take place as well. I think this thing makes sense. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but it certainly makes sense to me. Well, if you have a different opinion or even the same opinion, why not give me a comment, leave a comment below, and just let me know what you think of this plan, this 5-point plan, and or maybe you have a better plan. So just leave a comment or two. I always try to inform you, encourage you, and inspire you, and hopefully I have done that. I also like to let you know there is a TNR Independent Books, a Christian indie publisher, is the sponsor of this podcast, and it offers you an opportunity. If you are a Christian, you want to be a writer, but you don't know how, we have a course and we will train you and then publish you. If you know how to write, we're interested in publishing you. And so perhaps you already have something in a manuscript that's ready to go, or it's going to almost ready to go. Well, why not contact us? Fill out the application form, send that in. Doesn't cost you any money to do that. Let me look at it. I'll look at it, determine whether you're a fit or not for us. And then I will, if you assume I approve it, I will then send you not only links to where you can choose which way you want to go, full price or subscription, but I will also send you a coupon, a very important coupon with significant savings. Well, you have a great day, and I hope to see you in the next episode.